Now, in this video, I want to cover a few different news stories. Some are more recent, while others are a bit older and you've probably already heard them before, but they all relate to each other and they all relate to the future of the Star Wars films and who is and isn't going to be writing and directing them, as well as if there's someone out there or someones who can really start to turn this franchise around after it's gotten off to, shall we say, a rocky start under Disney. Okay, so let's begin with Rian Johnson and a comment he recently made in regards to the trilogy he'll be doing. You know, a trilogy that was given to him and announced by Lucasfilm before The Last Jedi came out and promptly sundered the fanbase. A trilogy that, oddly enough, we never really hear anyone from Lucasfilm or Disney mentioning, outside of some comments Kathleen Kennedy made at Star Wars Celebration about how Johnson would be among those sitting down and discussing the future direction of the franchise. And that had been pretty much the first and last bit of information heard about Johnson's trilogy from someone other than Johnson himself. Anyway, apparently those discussions about the future direction are ongoing because very recently Rian Johnson said, when asked if he could give us any updates about his trilogy, that, and this is in regards to Lucasfilm, the truth is they're still figuring out their schedule, their game plan. He then went on to say that if he has the time, and I'm pretty sure he will, he may squeeze in making another movie before getting to work on his Star Wars film or films. And really, there's a couple different things to take away from this comment or ways to look at it. And I know some of you will want to laugh and say Lucasfilm apparently still can't figure things out. But trying to look at the bright side here, at least it seems like they're trying to come up with a game plan this time. That they realize their game plan, or lack of it, for the sequel trilogy to essentially just let each writer and director come in and do their own thing with the individual episodes really wasn't the best idea ever. However, what doesn't make a whole lot of sense about this comment, though in all fairness this is just a one-line quote taken out of context, and maybe Johnson just worded his response about still trying to figure out a schedule poorly, but there is actually a schedule in place. It was officially announced a few months back that a new Star Wars film would be coming out in December of 2022, and that another new one would be coming out every other December for the next 2 years, or in 2024 and in 2026. And so when you consider we were told by Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, that things would be slowing down for Star Wars, I highly doubt any other Star Wars movies will be coming out in that time span, or that a schedule still needs to be figured out. I'd also assume that after the financial failure of Solo, this would be a new trilogy of films starting in 2022, not just 3 standalone films, which further implies that if other Star Wars films do eventually get announced and come out in this time period, which isn't impossible, they wouldn't be part of a different or new trilogy, rather they'd be another attempt at standalone films. In other words here, they likely won't have 2 trilogies running simultaneously. So basically, I don't know what Rian Johnson is talking about here, and I'm not sure he does either, or if, again, he just misspoke to some extent, or if maybe he's trying to continue to imply he's getting the trilogy he was promised, even though he's not, but he wants to keep reminding people about it so that Lucasfilm and Disney have a harder time sweeping him and that trilogy under the rug. Because, simply put, he's either a part of the upcoming trilogy or slate of 3 movies, which has a set release schedule, and would mean he more or less knows when he'd have to get to work on them, or he's not a part of it, and he is out of the loop and trying to sound like he isn't out of the loop. Either that or Lucasfilm still doesn't have a solid grasp on what they're going to do with the trilogy and who will be calling the shots on it, and Rian Johnson is being kept in a type of holding pattern. And that would make sense that there is confusion or indecision at Lucasfilm right now, given what happened with David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, otherwise known as D&D, the showrunners from Game of Thrones who, in February of 2018, it was announced would be writing and producing a new series of Star Wars films, according to an article posted on the official Star Wars website. But since then, D&D have signed a contract worth reportedly around $250 million with Netflix to produce several shows for their streaming service. And now, in the wake of that news, we've heard that D&D likely won't be writing and producing a whole series of Star Wars films, but rather writing maybe one movie and being consultants on the others. And look, before I go on here, let me just say that I don't blame people for being ambitious. Hell, we have Star Wars in the first place because George Lucas was ambitious once upon a time. And so I don't blame D&D for taking the money and jumping ship to create what I'd assume will be new and original stories for Netflix, their own thing essentially. Not to mention, considering what those two did with Season 8 of Game of Thrones, a lot of people, myself included, would just say, let them go. Don't let them anywhere near Star Wars anyway, especially if their mind is going to be elsewhere or on other projects, like it clearly was when they made Season 8 of Game of Thrones. In fact, bringing up another more recent story, Scott Beck and Brian Wood, and they're the two guys responsible for writing the surprise hit film A Quiet Place, were brought in by Lucasfilm and asked about doing either Indiana Jones or Star Wars, which sounds like a dream come true to most, to be able to work on one of those legendary franchises. But they not only turned Lucasfilm down, they had a recommendation for them, and that was to create new franchises. And that what they wanted to do is not create the next chapter of a franchise like Star Wars, but to create the next Star Wars. Which sure makes sense for them as creators or artists, and I certainly can respect their desire to come up with the next big thing, and best of luck to them. But Lucasfilm has no real interest in any of that. They were bought by Disney to, if we're being both blunt and honest about it, to milk Star Wars for all it's worth, not because of any true love or appreciation Disney on the whole had for the Star Wars franchise. Though, as I've said before, if Star Wars under Disney is fantastic, they can happily have my money. I don't have a problem with paying for great movies, shows, games, collectibles, and whatnot. I fully understand that there's a giant circle of life here. That if they give me good content, I give them my money, which allows them to make a profit, of course, but it also allows them to continue to make great content for me to pay for and consume down the road. And in a perfect world, that just goes on indefinitely, and everyone wins and is happy. Problem is, sometimes somebody takes over ownership of something others love, but the new owner doesn't exactly understand what it is that made it so great in the first place, but they continue to try and sell it anyway. And as someone who's spent a good chunk of their life working in the restaurant industry, I've seen this happen firsthand. I've seen someone buy an extremely popular and very financially successful restaurant and drive it straight into the ground in a very short amount of time. And it's actually very hard to pinpoint where it all went wrong, what it is that changed that turned so many customers away, especially when the new owner only made what seemed like very minor changes to either suit their own needs or desires, or to try to lure in even more customers than what they already had. But the thing is, it's really hard to sell something you either don't understand or don't have a true passion for, to those who do love and understand it, to those who can and will easily spot a fake. And so, for a lot of people, I'd wager, Disney Star Wars comes off feeling like a knockoff that's being passed for the real thing. It's kind of like a fake Rolex watch, in fact. And sure, some people are just happy to have a Rolex, and they don't want to really question or think about the fact that it might be a fake. Others are just happy because it's a close enough approximation to the real thing for them, and they realize that it's impossible to ever truly have the real thing because, for example, maybe it's out of their price range, or in the case of Star Wars, Lucas simply doesn't own it anymore. And so they're just happy, maybe even thrilled and more than satisfied with what they've got, even knowing it's not exactly the original. Then there are those who will immediately spot it as a fake and feel insulted and angry that someone tried to pass it off as the real thing. And as I've said before, one of my biggest issues with Disney Star Wars is I feel like I care about and understand it far more than the people making it and far more than those running the company. Now, I could be right or wrong about that, but that's just how I feel. But that said, I do still put myself in the category of someone who understands this might not be the real thing, that this isn't exactly genuine George Lucas Star Wars, but I'll be happy with it just as long as it's good enough and as long as those making it truly have a passion for it, even if they'd never quite understand it or present it the same way Lucas would have. The Star Wars Expanded Universe, for example, never felt quite like George Lucas Star Wars, not truly, but it was always so damn close, and it always felt like those writing the stories truly loved Star Wars the same way I did, and hence I accepted it. And to be fair and honest here, there is a lot about Disney Star Wars that I've enjoyed, and certainly a lot that I'm hopeful about and looking forward to, like The Mandalorian, Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and the Obi-Wan series. I also do have hope for Episode 9 that, at the very least, it can be a good, solid movie. But as for this next trilogy starting in 2022 and the whole future of Star Wars films, I'm very skeptical because they need to stop pursuing what's hot right now, like Benioff and Weiss after they did Game of Thrones, or Scott Beck and Brian Wood because they wrote one good movie, that being A Quiet Place, or Rian Johnson who had like one good movie and a few episodes of Breaking Bad to his credit, and then was given at first a movie and then a whole trilogy. And I get that in theory, maybe Lucasfilm is looking for the next George Lucas to run Star Wars. But these people they're courting don't want to be George Lucas. They truly want to be the next George Lucas. They don't want to carry on his legacy or walk in his shadow of greatness. They want to create their own legacy, which I'm all for. I'm all for someone making something new and original that blows the whole world away. But it's not these guys who are going to save Star Wars for them. Instead, it's someone who is okay with being forever in the shadow of George Lucas and may just find a way to add to his legacy, not change it and make it their own, or to use it as a springboard to somewhere else. Lucasfilm needs to find someone or someones who want this generation of Star Wars to be their legacy. They need someone or a small collection of people who can take the whole franchise by the horns and both make it their own, yet never ever lose sight of what it's always been. Lucasfilm's original idea of just bringing in different people to tell one single story or to make one single movie and then to be on their way afterwards without giving any real thought to what came before or after was a very costly error. Creating what they called a story group that doesn't actually come up with stories but instead only tries to ensure this mess of other people's stories don't conflict with each other was also a mistake. The story group should be driving the car headed for one singular destination, not playing traffic cop for dozens of other cars, just hoping to avoid accidents along the way while they're all headed to whatever destination they want. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this. And yes, I know many people will point to Dave Filoni and say he is the answer, and I agree with you, and he'd certainly get my vote if I had one. But with this video, I was really just trying to point out the problem, and if Filoni is the answer, that'd be great. I'm all for it. But if he's not, something needs to be done. Someone needs to come along and become a figurehead or representative for this company. Someone that the fans feel loves and respects Star Wars the same way they do. Anyway, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.